The man was shocked to find that his newlywed wife from the countryside was actually an invisible rich woman. Not only did she own a vast amount of farmland, over 100,000 acres, she also had dozens of livestock farms, each with an annual income of millions. She had even invested in many listed companies. Her annual income was in the hundreds of billions. After hearing this, the man immediately laughed and fainted. He had thought that marrying into the countryside would mean a life of hardship, but unexpectedly, he had stepped directly onto the peak of life. Anthony, being the son of a wealthy family, was originally supposed to marry Lisa, a wealthy heiress, but his younger brother Alan was instead promised to a woman from the countryside. Alan cried and refused to go to the countryside, so their biased mother forcibly arranged for the brothers to swap marriages and ruthlessly sent Anthony to the countryside in a farm vehicle. Anthony, who had no feelings for the wealthy heiress, was willing to accept any situation calmly, so he knocked on his wife's door without complaint. The elderly woman who opened the door was his wife, Lillian's grandmother. For their first meeting, the grandmother gave Anthony a watch as a gift. Anthony opened it and was stunned because the watch was worth $1 million. Before he could react, Lillian, his wife, stepped out. She didn't look like a country girl at all. Instead, she exuded an extraordinary air. Her appearance was absolutely stunning. Anthony felt that God had favored him. But how could there be such an exceptional woman in the countryside? It turned out that Lillian was not an ordinary farmer's daughter. She was just recovering from an illness and had come to the countryside to recuperate. Lillian believed that this marriage was just a transaction, that Anthony would not love her weak self, so she only hoped that he would take good care of her grandmother. She was willing to offer a generous reward in return. Thus, Lillian handed him a black gold card along with an agreement, but Anthony immediately returned both the gifts from her and her grandmother, because, to him, marriage was no game. Since he had come to this family, he would take on the responsibility of being a man. As a husband, he didn't need any reward. After saying this, he tore up the agreement right on the spot. Lillian had not expected things to develop this way, but she felt a secret joy in her heart. It seemed her husband was not a playboy after all, so Lillian truthfully explained the family's assets, endless land and a conglomerate, with an annual income of over 100 billion. The mountain of wealth made Anthony so happy that he fainted. After waking up, Anthony didn't get overly arrogant, nor did he lie down on the mountain of gold to sleep. Instead, he insisted on working in the fields. Lillian was even more pleased seeing Anthony's grounded attitude. Meanwhile, his brother Alan met his new wife Lisa. However, the rich heiress Lisa didn't seem so wealthy, because the first thing she did when meeting Alan was to ask for money. She immediately asked for $50 million. Lisa said that if he didn't lend her the money, then after her company went bankrupt, Alan, as her legal husband, would have to share the debt. Scared, Alan quickly lent her $50 million. Lisa then reassured Alan. She said that once she got the investment from the mysterious female tycoon, they could make $1.5 billion. Greedy Alan hurriedly took Lisa and her father to meet the female tycoon. They dreamed of making a fortune. Poor Alan still didn't know that the female tycoon should have been his wife. He could have had countless assets, but he had handed it all over to someone else. The female tycoon had now become his sister-in-law. When Alan and his party arrived in the countryside, they coincidentally ran into Daniel, who was working in the fields. Seeing his brother's embarrassed state, Alan smugly led Lisa forward. He ruthlessly mocked his brother and was glad that he had decisively fought for a better marriage for himself. Otherwise, he would have been the one working in the fields today. Daniel looked at his mean-spirited brother in disbelief and disappointment. Daniel had married for his brother's sake, to prevent him from suffering. Yet his brother didn't appreciate it at all, but instead mocked and ridiculed him. Daniel didn't want to say another word to him. Just then, Lillian's assistant appeared. The assistant loudly announced Lillian's gifts for Daniel: a Rolls-Royce, a mansion worth $50 million, and a conglomerate worth billions. Alan and Lisa were stunned by the sight. Daniel reluctantly said he didn't need these things and asked the assistant to take them back. At that moment, Lisa shouted that Daniel was faking it, pretending to put on a show to save face, and mocked Lillian as an ugly, poor village woman. Daniel couldn't let anyone slander his wife, so he argued with them. Just then, Lisa's father appeared, all smiles. He said the female tycoon had agreed to invest. Lisa and Alan were overjoyed. They hadn't expected things to go so smoothly. In fact, Lillian had never wanted to invest in this project, because she could tell it was going to lose money, but she had learned that Lisa's father was Alan's father-in-law, and thus, a relative of her husband Daniel. Only then did Lillian agree to invest. Little did she know, this would only make the other party more arrogant, and treat Daniel with even more disdain. After securing the investment, Alan and Lisa announced that they would make fun of him at the family banquet in 3 days. They were certain Daniel would show up with a rough, poor wife. What they didn't know was that Lillian would stun everyone that day and take back the most important thing from them: